There are millions of people worldwide that have been fully convinced that ginger people are indeed black.
Everyone who is ginger, those are black people.
Welcome, gingers. Or should I say gingers?
How do I feel about being black? I love it.
It sounds stupid, doesn't it? And that's exactly what I thought, until I decided to waste weeks of my life trying to find out if this claim had any factual truth to it. And to be completely honest, I'm scarily surprised with what I've found. There's 3 separate points in this argument breakdown that I've constructed, and we're gonna cover them all. But I wanna get you thinking. I wanna give you something that you can annoy the hell out of your friends with because they genuinely cannot argue with it. So let's start with the most obvious way someone can debunk this theory, at least at first glance, and that's biology. It's extremely hard to argue with. So what makes ginger people ginger? That will be one gene in the approximately 20,000 protein coding genes that make up the human genome. One gene called MC1R. There are trillions of cells that make up your body, and every single one of them acts very similarly to a factory. They produce things that the DNA tells them to. So think of MC1R like a control switch, controlling the type of melanin that the cell makes. To put things very simply, melanin produces pigment, and that pigment is doing many things, but it also gives things colour. The thing is, only one melanin, and therefore pigment, can be produced at one time in a cell. So on one side of the control switch is eumelanin, and that's the black and the brown pigment. Whereas on the other side is pheomelanin, and that is the red and yellow pigment. In each one of your cells, you've got a little factory manager that sits in his office all day and takes calls from the CEO. Oh, you want to switch back to eumelanin production? No worries, we'll switch to there. Oh, right now, back to pheomelanin? Absolutely no worries. Flip the switch, it all works efficiently, it's beautiful. That is exactly how the MCR1 gene should work. But it doesn't always work that way. In some cases, these factory managers have some secret agendas. They secretly want one side of the switch to be more favoured. They want one type of melanin to be produced more than the other. In reality, what the MC1R gene does is it encodes a receptor, and that's what I'm calling this factory manager. This receptor responds to a hormone called Alpha-MSH. And that's a hormone that the brain sends out in order to get cells to turn from making pheomelanin into eumelanin. The mutated version of this gene makes it so that the encoded receptor is faulty. It has a secret agenda. It's not going to change the cells from making pheomelanin to eumelanin. Instead, they stay making pheomelanin for way longer than they ideally should be. Now, if you multiply this one factory with this one mutated gene by 27 trillion cells on average that make up your body, you'll find that in these people, there's a lot more pheomelanin produced than there is eumelanin. And that results in pale skin, in freckles, in ginger hair, i.e., ginger people. This makes a lot of sense, and that's because this gene mutated in Northern Europe, and pale skin allows for better vitamin D production in low light environments like Ireland. But then what about the reason for red hair? What about the reason for the freckles? Well, there isn't actually a reason. It's just a side effect. The reason that this mutated gene survived in the gene pool is because the pale skin was the benefit. That's the reason that those people survived. They could produce more vitamin D. The fact that the majority of them have red hair and freckles is just because that's a side effect of the gene that survived. Okay, so now what makes black people black? A very similar, yet slightly different process. Instead of it just being one gene this time, it actually spans multiple genes, but they all work in a very similar way. They all work to achieve lower pheomelanin production and higher eumelanin production. The exact opposite of what makes ginger people ginger. Now again, this makes sense. Darker skin allows for better protection from the harmful UV rays produced by the sun in, you know, Africa. Now, as much as there are similarities between these two people, there is one major difference. And that's that black people aren't actually a mutation. The earliest version of humans, the first to ever evolve, evolved around 300,000 years ago. And that was in sub-Saharan Africa, where the UV levels were that strong that black skin was just the default that we first evolved with. Light skin only evolved fairly recently, around 6,000 to 20,000 years ago, and that's when we migrated from these harsh UV environments to continents like Europe. Therefore, white skin is the mutation here, not black skin. But what does this mean in the grand scheme of our argument breakdown? And I'm going to be completely honest, it's not put us off to the best start at all. Yes, these two are part of the same system, but they work in different ways. Different numbers of genes work to achieve different things. One isn't even a bloody mutation. Therefore, I'm going to have to give this first point to ginger people are not black. But there is some good news, and that's the fact that the physical similarities between these two groups has nothing to do with this trend or this argument. In fact, it has everything to do with our second part of the argument breakdown, and that is the social aspect. This is my sister, and I'm sure you're well aware she is ginger. Throughout the earlier part of her life, she definitely experienced the negative side effects of having ginger hair without going into a boatload of her personal life. So I decided to get her thoughts on what I'm calling the aesthetic identity. And that's a 3-step retelling of exactly what ginger people go through throughout their lives.
How many names do you think you could go off the top of your head of what you've been called?
Ginge, fire crotch,
Wow, that's a big jump.
redhead. Redhead's a big
Yep.
one. I think that's it.
Carrot top.
Carrot top.
That's one
I
I've
get called
heard.
carrot. I get called carrot a lot. Pumpkin.
Pumpkin. Is it just every orange
Pumpkin.
fruit?
Let me help you out here, Olivia. So we've got Ariel, Rusty, Firecracker, Fireball, Torchhead, Lighthouse, must I go on? But why do people with ginger hair get singled out so easily? And what does this have to do with kids being complete and utter knobs?
In geography class, I have a very core memory of this, and I hope that no one I know in high school ever sees this. It was in geography class. You had the same teacher. And there was an orange orangutan on the wall. And Teddy, every time he'd come in class, he'd bring it down and go, "Oh look, it's Olivia." I don't think it was anything to do with my hair colour, but I think it makes you stand out, so then you're like more prone to being left out.
Yeah, being picked
especially when you're a kid, like if you're different.
Oh, 100%.
Like you'll
Any
just
sort
get
of
excluded.
difference.
Normally you get put in like select groups, but there's not really that many like local gingers.
Local gingers in your area.
73% of bullies, at least according to Ditch the Label in 2019, say they do it because it makes them feel stronger, smarter, or just in general better than other people. Exactly how kids who are trying to prove themselves for the first time want to feel. They want to feel in control. These kids are anxious, they're scared, they're probably not fitting in for the first time in their entire life, and they really don't want to feel like that. So it's completely understandable that some of them will indeed go and put other people down. And where's the first place that these kids are going to look in order to find these people? Well, it's going to be the people with differences. Like Olivia was saying, the ginger hair puts a marker, a physical marker, on your head. It's a very clear and distinguishable difference that not many people have, so naturally it's going to be the subject of bullying. But something changes around a certain age where the script gets completely flipped on its head. It goes from ginger people being bullied to ginger people being loved. Maybe a little bit too much.
When I was in like year 9 or year 8, people started asking me what colour my pubes were.
In year 8.
Yeah.
Fetishization 1946, the birthplace of one of the most common and overused media, TV and film tropes in history. Rita Hayworth dyed her hair ginger for her role in Gilda as Gilda. And in doing so, she laid the blueprint that I am very sure you are way too familiar with. Gillian Anderson in X-Files, Alison Hannigan's in American Pie, Tiffany Case in James Bond, Scarlett Johansson in Iron Man 2, Ginny Weasley, Jessica Rabbit, Poison Ivy, Jean Grey, Starfire. The list is endless, and the overwhelming majority of all of these characters share at least two of these traits: fiery, seductive, and a sex appeal. The fiery redhead trope.
What year would you say where it flipped? Where it wasn't, you weren't getting bullied for being ginger as much, but now it's like people obsess with ginger people.
That's a good question. When I was like 17.
17.
So around when I started turning into a legal adult.
That's probably why.
As kids grow up and start becoming, functioning members of society, they take these preconceptions, these few life experiences that they've had, and they carry them with them subconsciously. But they are young adults now. They're not kids anymore. They don't bully as much, but with the introduction of hormones and emotions, they start to sexualize. 73% of teenagers have watched or consistently consume porn. And that is a ridiculously alarming statistic. But the thing is, it makes sense, and we can't be mad at them for it. These kids are experiencing emotions and hormones like this for the first time, and they are naturally curious. Human beings are curious creatures. It just kind of sucks that this generation has had the most exposure and access to this content compared to any other generation in human history. And the adult film industry doesn't care. They don't care who's consuming their content, even if it's illegal. What is an age restriction going to do if you can just lie and say you're over 18? I'm sure you're aware there are many issues with the adult film industry, but this is one that I think is severely overlooked. It's the fact that this industry is perpetuating that any difference should be a kink. Whether that be ginger hair, whether that be black skin, whether that be being Asian, being Mexican, every single difference has a different subcategory in all of these porn sites. What is that teaching to the widespread audience? Coming out of this sexualization is what I call the aesthetic identity. It's where someone who used to be bullied for a certain characteristic now takes pride and honor in said characteristic, which is inherently a great thing, but it does come with a very unfortunate side effect.
I mean, I take pride in it now.
Yeah, of course.
Like, I used to hate my hair. I've grown to love it though.
Would it almost be like, instead of a person, you are a physical identity? People don't see you as a person, they just see you as a characteristic.
Yeah, because I'm known by my hair colour. So the ginger one, Ginger Olivia.
The final step, and where we are as a society right now, at least with ginger people, is what makes every single business run. It's what anyone ever cares about.
People are dyeing their hair ginger, they're painting on freckles.
Yeah. Oh yeah, freckles.
Freckles, that's another one.
Freckles is a big one.
Painting on freckles, ginger hair dye, afro wigs, BBLs, these are all specific traits held by groups of people that, with enough public exposure and the sexualization, have become monetizable, because the people who used to bully these specific traits now want to look exactly like the people they were bullying. And of course, that comes with a charge. And this is because these real people, these individuals with stories, with dreams, with different cultures, everything in that bracket has all been condensed into one physical identity. These people aren't known as people. They're known by their specific physical traits, their aesthetic identity. And this is the reality of what's happened to these two groups of people. They've both gone through the exact same system. They were bullied, they were then sexualized, they were fetishized, they were then taking pride of their physical difference, and then money was made off of it by other people. That is exactly what's happened to both gingers and black people. But it's also not exclusive to them. All you have to do is take one look at the Asian community, or the Mexican community, or basically anyone with a physical difference that was once a minority. Humans are ridiculously predictable. Hopefully the similarities between these two groups are becoming a little bit more apparent. This is a very clear win for gingers are indeed black. But the thing is, it doesn't stop there. The final part of this argument breakdown is going to show, in my opinion, the most interesting connection between these two groups. And I'm going to let you make your mind up on this, because I've seen people online arguing that ginger people had it worse from a historical standpoint. Let's talk about that. 3100 BC in ancient Egypt, they weren't all black. In fact, they were surprisingly diverse. Egypt is strategically positioned between Africa, the Mediterranean, and the Middle East. It was a hotspot for migration and for trade, meaning that people of all ethnicities travelled there and also lived there, as depicted by many murals and vases that we've dug up. Do you know what didn't exist back then? Racism. It didn't exist. It wasn't a thing. But you know, slavery did exist though. Oh my God, slavery existed. But this was close to 5,000 years before the slave trade. So who were the slaves? Everybody. Ethnocentrism. This was the racism before racism. And it's judging someone not based off the colour of their skin, but off of their culture. Egyptians loved order. They saw themselves as the pinnacle of humanity, the centre of order. They were civilised, they were superior. And foreigners, well, they were dangerous. They were chaotic. And chaotic is a word that comes up quite a lot in Egyptian history. So much, in fact, that they had their own god of chaos, called Set. This was the antagonist god, or the evil god of the Egyptian pantheon. In fact, he was known as the trickster god, kind of like the Norse god Loki, as well as the god of war, kind of like the Greek god Ares. He was known as the god of chaos, the absence of order. Kind of like how Christians describe the devil, the absence of order, the absence of God. So to keep this god happy and appeased, of course, the only logical solution that the Egyptians could come up with was to sacrifice ginger people. But let's move a little bit further forward in Egypt's history now, when they were conquered by the Romans and absorbed into the Roman Empire, 30 BC or so, after Cleopatra's defeat. Nothing really changed. In fact, the Romans, completely different culture, but very similar beliefs. Romans also loved order, and they saw ginger hair as a marker of an uncivilized outsider. And that's probably because it was related with the Gauls and the Celts, who the Romans saw as barbarians. And the Ethiopians, people with darker skin, they were known as noble people, as wise people. Some of them even owning their own slaves. And of course, some of them were also slaves, but I do have to remind you, there were a lot of slaves in human history. There was loads. It was based on being an outsider, not on race. Yet, moving further forward now to medieval Europe, the year 500 to about 1500, and the rise of Christianity. Remember that Judas guy? Oh, selling out Jesus to Pontius Pilate. Not a very nice guy. He was depicted as ginger in the Bible. Wait, you're ginger in this time period? You've got to be a witch. Oh, my bad, sorry. You're not a witch, are you? Well, then you've got to be a werewolf. Oh my God, no, of course you're not a werewolf. That's my bad, guys. Then you have to be a vampire. There's no other explanation. Ginger people, satanic, seductive people, all of these stereotypes still exist today to an extent through media portrayal and also just word of mouth, like we've talked about. And this is where it's all come from. People having different cultures. That sounds really familiar. So where are black people up to? Oh, yep, the slave trade started. With the rise of Christianity, both of these groups of people were labelled marked by God, and both of those were in a negative way. But the difference is here, we kind of split off. Ginger people, this was kind of like the peak of ginger hate. It did decline very, very slowly after this, but all I'm saying is it didn't really get much worse. Black people, on the other hand, I don't really need to say anything, do I? But this is what people are saying online, and we'll do some very quick maths here. Ginger people oppressed from like 3100 BC to, let's say, the peak of 1500 AD. That's 4,600 years of oppression. And of course, it is still going on today, just, you know, we're not killing them anymore. As for black people, it's commonly accepted that racism as we know it today started in 1500 AD, or at least around there. So we'll go from there to just before Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech in 1963, the peak of racism, because, you know, after that, people stopped owning black people, at least sometime after that. Although a lot of people are saying it's making a comeback, so I guess I'll remake this video in 200 years or so and see where we're up to. So that comes out to 463 years. And I'm not a historical commentator, so I'm gonna let you do with that information what you will. Are ginger people black? Is a very misleading question. The real question behind this trend is, have these two groups of people faced the same discrimination, the same upbringing? And based off of this evidence, I am happy to report that the answer is a resounding yes. If you're interested in this science breakdown kind of thing, then watch this video I made on taxes, because that's definitely what you want to be doing with your day. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Much love.